So good morning, everyone. This April 25th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is beginning at 10:02 a.m. Convening by video conference pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. This meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating remotely via Zoom. The meeting link is included in the agenda posted on the town's website. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use a full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For items of public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Use the raised hand feature in Zoom to indicate that you'd like to offer a comment. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Leah Hill, to be read into the meeting record. Her email is lhill@nantucket-ma.gov. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members are present and can hear me. Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Carl Borchert.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Ian Golding is not able to join us today. Jen Carberg.
Here.
I don't see Christy Kickham yet. Joanna Roach is not able to join us today. And I think that is everybody. Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Leah Hill.
Here.
And Vince Murphy.
Here.
And then finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. So turning to the agenda, the first item is updates and announcements. The Nantucket Historical Association presented their Food for Thought lecture, a conversation on coastal resilience with Rachel Freeman and Claire Martin. That was held on April 20th. Hopefully there will be a recording of that available for anyone interested. And also we have the continuing training sessions from MassCZM on the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. There's information on the agenda about those sessions and they are being recorded and recordings are available. Next item on our agenda is the presentation from Rachel Freeman from the Nantucket Islands Land Bank regarding the 2023 annual town meeting article 102, real estate acquisition for 31 Easy Street, and 103, real estate conveyance for 31 Easy Street. Rachel?
Thank you, Mary. May I share my screen? Yes. Thank you. Let me just. Okay.
Your screen?
Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. Let's move this out of the way. Jesse Bell is here as well on the call to answer any questions specific to things that she may be better versed in, such as acquisition questions or, what work they've done in the background regarding this property. So thank you very much for being here today to talk about 31 Easy Street. This has come about as a property that is important for the town to be able to control as a result of planning that needs to occur for coastal resiliency pertaining to the Steamship Authority. And it is immediately adjacent to our Easy Street Park. And as you can see, it is an area that floods frequently. I feel like I'm starting to show these same slides like every other day. But this is a great one. And we see canoes, people rowing down. It's fabulous. And 31 is Mr. Arno's building right here. Everyone kind of colloquially calls it the Arno building. and it's had a lot of different purposes over the years, and right now it is vacant. So these are the present and projected tidal benchmarks that we're looking at, that everyone is very familiar with, and we'll be reviewing these at town meeting as well, which are suggesting not only at mean low water and mean high water, and all through storm events, will we be contending with flooding in these areas, and how are we going to be dealing with that, and particularly on this property at 31 Easy Street. We are looking at bulkhead heights that are all kind of different in that area, and how do we come together to make a solid plan in the Easy Street area that works for everyone. We've begun to look at flood predictions, and in the area, I keep moving everyone around, I should shrink us. We're looking at flood predictions in the area, and right now, basically what we start off with in the present elevation is flooding at 3 to 4 feet on the site at 31 Easy Street. And as we continue on, we can kind of start to understand that about 3.5 feet, it starts to flood infrequently, which is the orange pattern you're looking at here. Whereas yellow is flooding once a year, and then basically it goes to floods twice a month, floods daily, and green being the open water. So at this point, we're in, the floods infrequently to floods once a year area. And then the lower sites along that beach, are looking at more frequent flooding. As we continue forward, we start to look at the 2030 benchmarks, and we're getting more green into the area, which is the floods twice a month. And you can start to see how that's creeping up, and what was flooding once a year by 2030 is starting to look at flooding twice a month. And that's significant flooding. And as we continue on to 2040, and this is actually a prediction, 2040 is not part of the modeling. We extrapolated 2040 from data taken from 2030 and 2050. And now you can see that Easy Street is showing more of a daily flooding pattern, followed by a floods twice a month, actually, at the 31 Easy Street site and the adjacent park areas. So we're anticipating significant flooding here. By the time we get to, wrong way, sorry. By the time we get to 2050, we could potentially be looking at daily flooding in this area, which is why it's really important to consider what what's happening at this site, and how we should be considering whether or not this needs to be part of town planning, basically for steamship authority purposes. And this again is the exact same photo, just zoomed in, where we're seeing high levels of flooding across the site, which occur, at least once a year right now and during the winter, but more frequently it floods regularly. We also see this alongside our park, where we do have plenty of flooding. And what we're actually seeing right now in real time is that the edges are where we're having the most challenge with plantings, which makes sense, right? Because those are the most highly flooded area. So we're going to be transitioning to a rush in that area. We're looking at juncuses that might tolerate regular flooding more often. And those species will kind of be put around the edge to handle that water better. During the creation of the Easy Street Park with Michael Van Valkenburg Associates, we did a little bit of extrapolation. So this is a potential landscape plan where you could connect the two sites. The goal being primarily at this point that you could separate the pedestrian access from vehicle access, and you would have a boardwalk and a deck, which would allow you to get over to the steamship authority without actually having to be on the road. And it's a very congested area at this point. It would also allow for the steamship parking lot you know, to have any sort of increased bulkheading associated with it to try and retain that site as a dry site over time. And the other thing too that's been discussed, and all of these are just purely preliminary, is the idea of potentially this could be the site where the Steamship Authority terminal ends up, where it can be, you know, in a floatable area, but perhaps on posts or piers. But it's, you know, it's not quite as far out into the water as it is now. And again, a little bit more control with bulkheading and downtown flood barriers to promote as much reduction in flooding as possible. And this is the potential ask at town meeting, is for citizens to be willing to consider this as a part of the town of Nantucket's holdings, because it's an important component of coastal resiliency in the area. I think the other piece that should be noted is that there have been ongoing negotiations with the owner, and they haven't really come to fruition, which is why this is actually on a town meeting as a potential taking, which is never an easy discussion to have. And I think that was all I had for slides. Let me just get out of here and I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much. Jesse, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't think so. That was a good debriefing on the situation.
I think
No.
we wanted to make people aware,
Yeah.
because this could be a controversial topic. And I think it's important for people to recognize where town planning is important, and we need to be thinking ahead on things like this. And the Steamship Authority isn't going to be ready to start doing any major planning in this area for some time. And so it's a good time to start thinking about what we should be planning with.
So I was just going to say, in reading your coastal resiliency plan, it notes that the Steamship Authority is the most critical, I think it says it's the most essential piece of infrastructure and the most vulnerable also. And I think we all know it's our lifeline. It's how we get all of our supplies and services, the majority of them anyway. And as Rachel has said before, this is one of the more difficult conversations we're going to have as a community. Some of these, you know, buildings are just not going to work, and that location is, you know, that's a really good, I think, example of that, you know, of that issue. So.
Thank you, Jesse and Rachel. Any comments or questions from committee members? Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. No, thanks, Rachel and Jesse. I think it's good to see a clear idea of why this is an important piece of property. You know, I'm kind of thinking more of like what town meeting might be like. And I'm curious, you said, Rachel, that there were discussions with the landowner, and I wanted to know if, I mean, obviously that's probably a private conversation, but just thinking of what might come up at town meeting, what were some of the discussions? Why is there reticence? I think, and this is not for exact knowledge, but anecdotally, that building's been vacant for quite some time, or at least a couple of years anyway. So I just wanted to know what some of that pushback might have been.
Thank you, Sarah. Rachel or Jesse?
Thank you, Sarah. That's helpful. I think one of the reasons that we wanted to have this discussion too is to understand what people are going to ask in the community. You know, what do you anticipate people are going to ask at town meeting regarding this? This is a great reason that Jesse's on the call, and I think this is a perfect question for her to answer.
I mean, unfortunately, negotiations haven't really gotten started because basically, we made him a generous offer, and he in turn sent us a very large stack of papers, basically indicating that it's going to cost more. It's about a concept known as enhancement value for abutters. So basically, meaning that it's going to cost more to abutters than a private buyer to purchase this property. So that was one thing that happened. And then, so we did want to commence negotiations as a group, the steamship, the town, and the land bank, and he wanted us to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that any discussions about value or anything is not introducible in a later trial on an eminent domain taking. And as public entities, we can't do that. So we continue to reaffirm our interest in purchasing the property. But it has not been an easy road.
Yes, follow up, Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. And some of these questions are thinking about, I could imagine people looking at this as setting a precedent for the eminent domain kind of taking in the name of resiliency. And so I'm just, thinking through people knowing that. I imagine that there was an attempt to play more than fair market value or fair market value for a home. So I think that, or a business or, a building, I can see people thinking, well, what about my property, right? So I just think you've probably already thought of this, but I think of those as the kind of questions that there is, there's to me, the other argument too could be that there's a vacant building that's been, vacant for some time in an area, in a really high traffic area. When you said, Rachel, the ability to make a walkway that to the steamship that is a safe walking route. I mean, I think all of us, regardless of the resiliency piece, can see what a value that would be to our community. Not that alone is a reason to take a property. And my other question, I guess, is sort of my lack of knowledge of if it is voted through at town meeting, then let's say it's voted for at town meeting, what is the value that the landowner would get? Is that different than what was offered? Or I'm just curious what that trade-off is. If not selling ahead of time, if going to this point, what's that the difference?
So I think we at this point are still saying we're going to make best efforts to negotiate. And so the taking is really just a tool of last resort. But he would be paid fair market value that would be established by appraisal. And I think my understanding of it is that if he's able to get a different appraisal, then he can take us to court, and then there's a battle over expert appraisals as to the value of the property. But I totally understand. I think a lot of people understand the sensitivity to the idea of a taking. And we don't take that lightly. But I don't think a stronger case than, the Steamship Authority as arguably the most critical piece of infrastructure for the island, for justification for that.
Thank you, Jesse. We'll go to Rachel.
Thank you, Mary. I wanted to ask a question to the committee. And I'm really excited that this discussion is happening, because outside of the concept of taking, ultimately what we are dancing around here is the retreat and relocation plan that the town is considering putting together. And this is just an example of retreat and relocation. And it's interesting. I am very curious what people on the committee feel would be justification for retreat and relocation, just kind of in general. What is a qualified reason to have to retreat and relocate? And I would love to hear, sort of like Sarah's been offering, comments from other people as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Before we go to Gary, who also has a comment, is there anyone that wants to respond directly to Rachel's question?
my hand up.
Oh, Peter?
Yeah. Has the Steamship Authority indicated that where Rachel said that the terminal might go, is that what they're thinking? And I mean, is that far enough back? I mean, the water, is it going to be far enough back? We know that it's not going to be 10 years until they start doing anything anyway. And then I guess the questions for Jesse is, does Mr. Arno not want to sell, or does he just have a different price than you guys are looking at giving him? And I mean, obviously nobody wants that building. No one's coming to buy it. Given our real estate market and the way the island's going, you would think someone would have bought it and put something there. But I mean, why is he being difficult?
So let's pause on that. I was asking for direct responses to Rachel's question about retreat and relocation.
I understand, but I had questions, the stuff that happened before that. So
Yeah,
that's what that was.
So did Gary, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So I guess, so that at the annual town meeting, the vote is, is there a number that is in the actual warrant article or not? Or is it just that the town is authorized to buy that, or I mean, what does the article specifically say with respect to the value of that property? Because
Leah, can you put the article on the screen? Just, I think 102 is sufficient. And we'll be looking for the Finance Committee motion on that. And can you scroll down a little bit to see the rest of the Finance Committee motion? Here we go.
okay,
That is the article.
yeah, I see. So there's no dollar amount in there. So, you know, when I look at this and I see the fabulous photographs that you screen shared with us, it seems clear that this is something that is not going to have a tremendous long-term commercial value, because no one's going to buy it when they realize that they're going to be underwater half of the time. So my thought is that this is a perfect example of a piece of property that the town ought to use eminent domain, because we know this is such an important part of our infrastructure, part related to the ferry terminal. And we should kind of set a precedent saying, when we have something that is so obvious that needs to be done and protected for the long-term safety of the town, and eminent domain is the way to go, we should just do that and let all of the landowners know in other areas of the island that if the town really sees something that is so vital to our safety long-term, we're going to do it and not shy away from an eminent domain proceeding. Because at that proceeding, the owner is going to say this is very, very valuable, and then we're going to show the people judging this the fact that it's going to be underwater in 8 years or 7 years or something like that, and that'll reduce the value. So I think this is not a bad example of the town to say we're going to do it, and we're going to use eminent domain. And I just don't know why the annual town meeting people would be reluctant to at least approve this particular article.
Thank you, Gary. All right, we've got multiple threads going. I want to try and address Peter's question before we go to Jen. Peter, when the Steamship Authority representatives, Bob Davis and Nat Lowell and Rob Ranney were at our meeting, what they said was that they would be ready to begin planning the Nantucket terminal renovation in 5 to 6 years, with a goal of having the work complete by 10. So it's not quite that they're not ready to do anything for 10 years. This idea of moving the terminal back landward has been given to them. But again, because they're not ready to do planning, I'm going to speculate that they're not actively discussing the location of the terminal. So from my small bit of knowledge, that's what I know about the Steamship Authority. You had other questions. Do you want to restate them so that Rachel and Jesse can respond?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, I don't know what his reluctance is. I mean, his fact that it is going to be underwater, you think you'd want to sell it. And my question was, is from that large stack of paper that Jesse mentioned, is that, did you gather that his what he wants for it is more than you guys are committing, or I didn't, that seemed kind of muddy to me.
I'm not sure if I understood completely everything he was trying to convey in that big stack of paper. But I do think he is willing, because he has, he's asked us to sign the non-disclosure. He wants to start negotiations, but he wants us to sign these non-disclosure agreements before. So I don't think it's an unwillingness. And I just wanted to comment on your first question. That I wanted to qualify those plans are really just meant to be like a visualization exercise. Obviously, the steamship's going to have to go through a massive master planning effort, but the town wants to round that corner, so that's based on like the typical standard turn radius, that they've used, and just to show that that park can be, it's a template that can be extended along the water. So it's there, it's working for the most part. I think that the last 3 years have proven that. And so yeah, those plans are really just a visualization exercise meant to, show how the pedestrian traffic could be separated, and people could literally just walk off the fast ferry and walk along the water to Main Street. And we think that that's a really awesome concept. And, so.
Thank you, Jesse. I will go to Jen.
Thanks, Mary. I've had a couple of thoughts going through, and part goes back to Rachel's question, and just thinking about how you talked about how this site works for coastal resiliency. And I almost wonder if this isn't necessarily a retreat location, but it's an adaptation location, because we've definitely talked about how there are areas that we're going to have to protect going forward because we need them for infrastructure. We're going to have to adapt them to water coming. And then there's areas that we're not going to choose to do that. And that's where retreat and relocation happens. And when I think about this area, and I think about, the downtown flood barrier that we've talked about, and just everything kind of related to town, it seems like anything in this area and then close to the Steamship Authority, it's like, this is something we need to keep because we need it, for all the reasons, Jesse, you were talking about, we need the Steamship Authority. It's our lifeline to the mainland. So this is like, I like the term adaptation, I guess, area better here. It's like the town needs the flexibility to have this property so that we can figure out what we can do to maintain access in this area and maintain access to the Steamship Authority. I do think we need to think through, Rachel, what are those triggers for relocation and how to have that conversation. I think that's a deeper conversation. One of the questions I was thinking of when you were first putting it up, and this might go towards talking about it at town meeting, is like, you've had all the analysis done on like Washington Street extension and looking where the water goes and thinking about how, you could actually adapt that area. And I wonder if any thought has gone in, or even proposing that work could go forward here, because I think some of the questions you might get are, okay, if you get this property and you change it, how long do we have it? I think some of those time questions of how you could use it to maintain that access to the Steamship Authority, besides just the park connection, which I think is important in that pedestrian walkway, but that's now. I think some of those questions of the future, if we're really going to file this under coastal resiliency, is how is that actually going to work for future access use? I think that's all.
Don't forget that the height of any building or other infrastructure also determines its resiliency. We wouldn't necessarily be building at ground level. That I think Rachel mentioned that, a new terminal building might be on piers. It might actually end up being over the water, but it would still function as a terminal building if it was high enough that it could avoid flooding.
Yeah.
Sarah?
I'm sorry, Mary, can I just real quick, because I agree the elevation of the buildings that you're putting in place, but I think if we're actually going to this important step of taking by eminent domain, which is a big step for the town to do. I think what people are gonna want is how does it actually get us to those points of maintaining access or maintaining resilience to the steamship authority, and that I mean, maybe this is just a beginning conversation bringing it to town meeting, but I expect that people will want some of that deeper analysis or understanding. Maybe I would.
Thank you, Jen. We'll go to Sarah.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, and I just wanted to add one thing to Rachel's question. I think it's a really important one. Just like Gary said, I think some aspects of this are like very understandable for why this particular property, but having a broader discussion of what those triggers are that will, create an eminent domain take or a need for that, I think has to be like taking a step back and looking at, as we talked about before, out with not thinking of any one property, what those are. Because I think one thing that I could see coming up as a question too is why now? So, when we've sort of talked about in the past, very generally, when we've not in previous meetings, I should say, about when we've talked about, general relocation for homes or that kind of thing, oftentimes we've kind of gone around on the discussion of a timeline. So like there's a, like when, maybe a 100-year lease, or at some point when it's unlivable, then that turns back to a nature of landscape or something. When we were talking about taking something as eminent domain, I think I've often personally thought of like, okay, construction needs to happen to have this highway go through or something. And so, there's something taken for eminent domain. In this instance, it's not that the building is currently unusable or currently unlivable. And so I just think we should think about the why, like the question might come up of why now, like why this year, why not in 5 years or something. So I think it makes sense personally, I think it makes sense to start now for a building that is currently unused to design these kind of more adaptation strategies, but without the steamship having a current plan to use that site, there might be pushback of like, it doesn't need to happen at this town meeting. And so just thinking through the time, I know like Jen had a different discussion of timeline, but I think thinking through the timeline piece of why this year might be part of the discussion too.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll go to Carl.
Yeah, I was just curious, has the steamship, when the steamship officials came to your meeting, did they say they had no interest in working to get this building and leave it up to the land bank and the town? Or are they, they're going to benefit from this, obviously from our planning, which is important, but did they want to contribute something toward the cost, or do they want to contribute something toward taking the building, or do they want nothing to do with it and they want the land bank and the town to deal with it?
Jesse?
So we, like I said, we are working in partnership with them, and it's actually interesting there that the wharf ends at, so that building like directly fronts on, it's still wharf property that like Broad Street ends right where Easy Street intersects at the end.
Leah, can you put up the town's GIS system so we can show the ownership and the boundaries? Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
And conceptually, what we've been discussing and have agreed to just verbally is that whatever the final plan or whatever we end up getting each entity, we would pay for the prorated, fair share of the purchase price. So it would be based on square footage received. We would pay the proportionate amount of the purchase price. So that's sort of how we decided to move forward together. And I just wanted to respond to some, and this, I just want to say it's been really helpful, and I appreciate having you all as a sounding board for this, because this is great. To Jen's points about, people are going to want to know what the plan is, and I think, to know that there's an extensive permitting road in front of this whole project. I mean, you're talking local you know, historic, HDC, Concom, obviously Chapter 91, all kinds of, probably more state permits than I even know about. And so there's going to be lots of opportunity for public comment and input, and, you know, because we're all public entities, and it's all going to be, you know, public processes. So there's that. And, you know, there's things as far as why now, there's things, time is really, well, first of all, you see the projections about water, but then also it's helpful to have, like, we know that there are historic elements potentially in this building, or I think that there was a study done, and I think there's one portion of it that's truly historic, but that, you know, remains to be determined by the HDC. And so, you know, that gives us time to see if there's a potential to relocate it somewhere else. And again, the permitting road is extremely long and is going to take, so not just permitting, so first it's the planning, then the permitting. I mean, you're talking 5 to 10 years, I think, realistically. So I just think, you know, all of that has to be factored in when we talk about why now.
Thank you, Jesse. We'll go to Matt.
Yeah, I think the picture that's on the screen tells us why it's a priority now. It's one of the last remaining parcels that is needed to then figure out what to do down on Steamship Wharf. I grew up in that area. My family had buildings on the corner of Easy Street and buildings where that parking lot is now. And I understand, you know, it has slowly been being acquired by the steamship in the town and for a long time. And we've, you know, without knowing it, we've been doing the right thing for the long term. So I think this picture tells us why. And then I don't think it's a retreat situation at the steamship. I think it's a protection situation. You know, I think that we're going to have to find a way to put up bulkheads that are tall enough and raise roads to get there, unless we move it completely. And I don't know where that would go and how long that would take and how many billions of dollars that would take. So I think that, you know, in the next 50 years in my kid's lifetime, I think that this will be, it'll still be here in some manner. From a standpoint, Todd is one of the smartest guys, you know, sort of intelligence wise on Nantucket. I'm pretty sure he did papers at MIT and a bunch of other stuff. He's published and, you know, is sort of a genius. I think in this case, I think the sooner he sells, the better price he's going to get. The longer this goes, I think the harder it's going to be to sell and the lower the price is going to go, you know, and so I think at this point, I would hope that he could, you know, the town and he could come to an agreement. But I think the longer this goes, the less valuable some of these things are going to be. Why not just wait? You know, you look from a finance committee standpoint, why don't you wait? Eventually it's not, you know, you'll pay a lot less. But I think because of the planning that is necessary for the town, because of the location, because it links, when you look at this picture, it links the steamship to all the way to the Dreamland. Then you're only dealing with the steamship, the town, and the yacht club to sort of figure out how to stop a lot of flooding in a large area. That's really important. So, you know, this is a crucial project, and I'm glad that you guys are taking a point position on it and doing the planning on it and bringing it forward, because I think it's crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Whatever happens to the property value, the construction costs are probably only going to continue to increase based on recent history. So there's that countervailing view of cost. Other comments or questions? Jesse?
The other point I just wanted to add 2 points. So in addition to planning and permitting, if we're not able to successfully negotiate with him, you know, the taking itself and the litigation that would likely result from that is also going to take time. And it really wouldn't be responsible for us as a group, the town steamship land bank, to start doing any planning on that site unless we know that we're going to own it. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that I don't know if I think we all like rule it out somewhat, but is it inconceivable that a private buyer might buy that property and raise it and do something with it? I feel like on Nantucket sometimes I feel like, people do things that I'm surprised at sometimes, and it could happen, and that could take that property, out of the equation for planning for another, couple generations. So, anyway.
Other thoughts? Right, go ahead and take the screen share down, Leah. All right, well, thank you to Jesse and Rachel for giving us more information about that property.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was very helpful feedback.
Great. All right, next item on our agenda is to discuss a potential site visit to Codfish Park and Sconset Bluff to view the existing conditions. Jeff Carlson, Natural Resources Director, would be the guide. And the questions would be, what are we doing by going out there? What do we want to learn? Some logistics and some requirements that we need to be aware of, and recording it. We do have the capability to record by drone, which would be video only. That would give us the opportunity to see the broader picture than what we can look at ourselves from the beach. Do some closer views and do some wide angle views as well. And then would we want to record probably just using a cell phone, so we would have the descriptions that Jeff would be providing, as well as the opportunity to review that in the future as we think about the conditions there. So thoughts on a potential site visit? Just generally, do people think that's a good idea or not? Sarah? And
Yeah,
then Carl.
Thanks, Mary. I think a site visit is a great idea, but maybe before we schedule a site visit to like be explicit about what our goals are for the site visit. So what do we want to get out of it, just so we make the best use of it. I know it's probably a lot of time for not just us, but for Mary and Leah to organize a trip like that. So just to be really clear about what are we trying to capture in a field visit. But I always think field visits are a good idea. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, that's the point of bringing this topic for discussion, is to make it worthwhile. Carl.
Yeah, I would be very interested in the site visit, having followed the debates and the news about the bluff, especially for the last few years, many years. I would be very interested in the site visit, and I think it would be a great idea.
Thank you, Carl. This grew out of a request from Joanna about establishing a common base of knowledge so that we all knew and had the same information at our fingertips, what the conditions were out there. And, I know that probably all of us have at one time or another been out to the bluff, but maybe not for many years, maybe not from the beach. That I thought it was a really good idea that we all did have that common understanding of, what exactly is there out there. Jeff would talk about the potential threats, the changing environment, the existing adaptation structures that are there to protect the bluff and the properties. But anything that we would want to make sure that we had Jeff prepared to answer, that's what we want to know here. Peter?
Yes, so would we then, I think we should, but would we then go and visit other sites around the island that are key? Because we don't want to focus all on Codfish Park on the east end of the island. There are lots of other places where we should have the common knowledge in our heads when we're talking about it.
Yes, this would be a template for future site visits in other locations. Yes.
Okay.
Jen?
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I'd echo what Peter said. I mean, I understand getting a common base knowledge on locations around the island is good. I'd like to make sure we're prioritizing where we're going based on what our future actions are. We've been starting to talk about the the retreat plan, I think focusing on visiting places where we're thinking about what retreat looks like, you know, I think us going to Sconset is fine. But I also want to know what our end point is there. Are we doing a visit, you know, just to have base knowledge, or are we looking to give more input in other ways? And then I think we can also explore how to do it without recording by maybe talking to Jeff about what that looks like with the Concom, because the Concom does site visits. And if I remember, when we used to do them, we weren't allowed to have conversation around topics, but we could go and ask informative questions. So I think we could find a model where we could do it without having to worry about or figure out what recording open meeting looks like.
So let me clarify, I should have mentioned it. This would not be an open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. This would be a site visit, which is a different category. So we would not be recording because it's an open meeting. We would be recording so that we would have the information available to inform us for discussions in the future, and potentially also to share with the public who might not be able or interested in making that effort to go out there, but would nonetheless appreciate having that information available. Vince, do you want to talk a little bit more about the restrictions on the site visit as an event as opposed to an open meeting?
Sure. So we just as in from the discussions that are taking place in the idea, we probably hit a number of locations, not just one. So it would follow the same format as, say, Concom site meetings that Jen has already talked about. Jen has already hit the critical term, informative discussion, informative site visit, and you can't ask specific questions. You can only ask specific questions about, say, the structure you're looking at. For the sake of argument, and I'm only going to use an example here, you can only talk about, say, the composition of the structure. For the sake of argument, are there 4 geotubes at this location? You can't ask about performance. Is it doing X, Y, or Z? Is it living up to or not living up to the desired concepts? That then gets into discussion that should happen during an open meeting. So I think the way that we had discussed this working was that this would be a site visit, then a future CRAC meeting would then have the discussion on these things. But we just have to be careful a little bit, because the Coastal Resilience, the Coastal, I beg your pardon, I'm just so used to saying Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, but the Concom are already discussing issues to do with this area, as are the Select Board. But I think that the approach that Mary was talking about for this was to look at it in context for the island. So how can we look at the East End, so not just the geotube area, but the whole bluff area in context? Then, like Peter was saying, looking at other areas, can we do the same for Madakit, Tom Nevers, move around the island in that kind of a fashion, just as an idea of collecting up information, understanding the local issues, and trying to make sure that we don't run afoul of open meeting law and the rules regarding site visits. So like Mary was trying to say, like Mary exactly said, this would be the first kind of test bed. You visit a site not as a committee meeting, and then take the information into a committee meeting at a later point.
Thank you, Vince. I can elaborate a little bit more about the potential agenda for such a meeting. Agenda is probably the itinerary, let's call it that. So what I had thought of is that we would begin at Codfish Park. We'd hear first about Low Beach and the situations that exist there. We'd take a look at the actual Codfish Park locations where there have been houses lost in the past, and talk about the history of the beach moving in that area. Then we would move to the Bluff Walk and descend from the Bluff Walk down to the beach and walk northward past the geotubes to about Sankaty, or a little bit north of Sankaty. So we would see the entire stretch of conditions where the bluff is currently threatened by erosion, beginning at the top end of the Bluff Walk, where it's not threatened. There's a vegetative plain in between the beach and the bluff, and seeing how that changes as we walk north. So the idea is to get a good picture of the entire Sconset section of the Eastern Shore, from Low Beach to the lighthouse. And I think Leah measured that out about a mile round trip for the northern section, walking on the beach. And essentially just, you know, a few 100 feet down at the Codfish Park section. So making sure that everybody's aware of the physicality of it. Any other thoughts? So generally, I heard that people are in favor of doing this. The next, also to provide context about why we would start here, and that's because we've been asked to talk about the Sconset Bluff situation. That's why we're starting here. So if people are in favor of this, what we would do is we would go to Jeff and flesh out a little bit more the things that we want him to talk about, what we hope to learn. We'd look for a date where we could schedule this, potentially our next meeting date. In lieu of a meeting, we would have a site visit. If not on a meeting date, then we'd have to figure out some other opportunity. How do people want to proceed? Do you want to think about this and email Leah with your questions that you would want Jeff to answer? In addition, Jeff and Leah and Vince and I will also work out what we think would be good background information. We can continue discussing questions here. I'm open to the committee's suggestions on how to move forward on this. Is there anybody who does not want to participate or thinks that the site visit is not a useful idea? All right, I'm not seeing any reaction there, so I'll take that as generally this is a good idea. Any thoughts about using our next Tuesday meeting date or picking some other date? Rachel, you're giving me a thumbs up for Tuesday. Christy, I'm sorry, I should have acknowledged you joined it about 10 minutes after. Thank you. So a couple other thumbs up. So we will attempt to plan a site visit for, I think it's Tuesday, May 2nd. Is that the, yes. No, sorry, May 9th. Tuesday, May 9th. And we will get back to you with logistics. Potentially, we could meet at the Natural Resources Department office and take a van or some trucks and carpool out. We also have the potential to meet and park in Codfish Park if we have to make individual trips. But I was just thinking of the opportunity for, you know, not taking a dozen cars out there if we don't need to. And I want to stress the requirement that we not have discussions or deliberations. That includes in the vehicles going out, that includes hanging around the parking lot. We cannot have discussions outside of an open meeting, and this would not be a posted open meeting. This would be a site visit with a very restricted ability for us to communicate with each other. So talk about sports, talk about kids, talk about international politics, but nothing related to coastal resilience. Peter?
We can use my van.
Great.
If you want, takes 11 passengers. So
Okay,
if that's what we want to do.
I appreciate that, Peter. All right, so we'll work out some logistics. Please, if you have questions that you would like to get answers to, send them to Leah so we can coordinate that with Jeff so that he's available with the answers. Again, going back to recording, not recording it because it's an open meeting, but recording it in order to have that information available for later reference. Any objections to doing that? Or any other thoughts on recording? I'm seeing no objections. So we'll ask Morgan to be prepared to join us with the drone. And hopefully somebody will be able to do some cell phone video. One thing that you might want to think about is bringing a notebook or clipboard, or perhaps we can provide them so that you can write down questions or points that you want to bring up at a later discussion. And that's part of why I thought it would be useful to have the video footage so that you'd be able to point to a particular shot that we took and say, you know, when we were here, I had this question, or I had this thought that I wanted to share. So that's another reason for the reference. I thought we would also try and get maps so that we could, again, mark points of interest or points of reference. So we'll try and have maps printed out for people to take along with them. Leah or Vince, any other logistical things that we want to bring up now? Leah, and then we'll go to Gary.
We were also talking about that it may be longer than the 2 hours. So just keep that in mind while we kind of flesh out the logistics.
Thank you, Leah. Gary?
Unfortunately, I'm still learning how to walk, so I don't think I'll be taking that tour with you. But I'll be interested in what the videos look like.
Thank you, Gary. All right, please do feel free to reach out to Leah with any questions or comments about this, and we will get back to you as soon as we can with more details. I'm looking forward to it, and everybody fingers crossed for good weather. So speaking of weather, this will go forward unless the weather is nasty. So if the weather is just not nice, we'll assume that we're going ahead. And we'll try and let you know. Vince, did we talk about 24 hours notice, I think? Or
Yes, we said we'd check the weather first thing, say the Monday morning for the sake of argument to confirm that it's a go for Tuesday morning, if that was the selected date by which it sounds like it is now.
okay, so that's the plan. All right, any other questions or comments on the site visit? All right, next item on the agenda. So we had asked everybody to watch the recordings of the Select Board and Concom joint workshop meetings on the Sconset Bluff erosion protection. And we had been asked to talk about best next steps. So again, this is likely a continuing conversation. But for today, the 2 meeting recordings, the links were in the agenda. We have not yet had a report produced for those 2 meetings. The Arcados team is working on that, but would like to have people's reactions and discussions about the outcome of those meetings, or not necessarily the outcome, but the whole situation at the Sconset Bluff with the geotubes. Thoughts or comments? Gary?
Well, having watched the last meeting, I came away with a conclusion that there will be no agreement, that the funding issues are so substantial. And the fact that the billionaires have already walked away from the thought of continuing to fund this, the billionaires who live on the bluff, I think that further meetings will continue to be frustrating. And at the end of the day, what will need to happen is how we can follow through with the existing plans for removing those geotubes. There's a bond that the association has put up and stuff like that. And we'll see how long it'll take for nature to do what it does. It may not happen right away, and it may happen sooner than we want. It may happen many years later than we think. But at the end of the day, the costs are so substantial. I can't imagine that group coming to a conclusion because the rest of the island is not going to want to participate in substantial funding for saving, a handful of homes on the bluff, which at the end of the day, all of which were being financed by the locals, and they're not willing to do that anymore. So it's just, it looks to me like people are trying to do the right thing, but the funding issues are so substantial. I can't imagine they're coming to a successful conclusion.
Thank you, Gary. Before we go to Matt, because Matt was a participant, I want to make sure that other committee members have the opportunity to offer their thoughts. Peter?
I mean, I covered all that for the Coastal Conservancy. And I know there's money for the removal. I know there's not money for keeping it covered and keeping the thing going, but there's money for the removal. So that's not a cost we worry about. I could be wrong, but pretty sure.
Other committee members? So again, I think we'll go to Matt in just a second, but I think that what we were asked to do was provide our opinions of what are the best next steps, not necessarily constrained by the conditions that are there now, in terms of the participants, in terms of the funding, in terms of the structures. You know, what would be, from our island-wide perspective, the best next steps on the Sconset Bluff. And that covers the Baxter Road relocation, it covers the geotubes, it covers any other protective structures that are there. It covers any additional proposed protective structures, or the removal of any. So thoughts from committee members in any of that? Peter?
Well, I mean, the next best steps are the town can't probably afford to keep the geotubes covered. Maybe we want to keep them in there, and while we, you know, the next best step to me is to reroute the road. I mean, of course, retreat to me is the ultimate. People should be pulling back. They're obviously not going to do that. The fear is that individual property owners will come up with their own plans for protecting their properties, but the town should be proactive and, I mean, and take care of the road and get it set, and then think about removal of the geotubes. That's how I see it.
Thank you, Peter. Other committee members? All right, let's go to Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I had some thoughts leaving it. I think it can't be, I think there's a lot we're learning that is applicable anywhere. And if our position is we can't do anything anywhere, then, you know, I think that that's a mistake. I think that there are principles that you guys have heard me talk about it, where the people gaining the benefit should pay, because that will pay a majority of it. We all share it, the steamship, for example, because we all use it. But in an area like this, they should pay a good amount of it, because that will enable us to make smart decisions and not spend millions of dollars for one or two houses. I think in going forward in situations like this, I think the town has to figure out what the right thing to do is, you know, and sort of what the triggers are and how to do it. The town knows it's one thing to say, do the road. It's another to try to get the road done with a bunch of neighbors who are no longer cooperative and who are going to fight us every step of the way. So we have takings and years of litigation ahead of us, you know, down one path that I think will be replicated in other areas if we're not careful. We've already had it in Sheep's Pond, which is a relatively simple area. So I think the town, you know, the coastal resiliency department has to say, this is what we're doing, and here are the triggers, and here's how we're going to pay for it. And we need to go to the neighborhoods and say, this is what we're doing. The front row pays X and the back row pays a little less. And here's, you know, here are the triggers. If it starts to harm other people, this is what we're doing, and give them an opportunity. And if they don't want to sign on at that point, then what can we do? You know, so I think in this situation, I don't see it as, I don't think we're done yet. I think that there's some smart choices that still could be made here. I think that there's sort of a way to equitably allocate this and to protect other areas. And I don't think that this is done. I think some of the, so that was my point coming out of it that was clear to me was that a nonprofit from a few citizens of an area isn't a big enough entity to undertake this. It has to come from the town. And I don't know that the town has the willingness or the wherewithal to do that. but it's very clear the town has to do that. Pick on Baxter Road, if the town went and said, here, we're gonna do A, B, and C, and here's how it's gonna be paid. And we went to Concom and they approved the first part of it, et cetera, then we could go and say, we need X amount of funding. If you're not willing to fund it, then, then we are in this other thing. Part of doing that funding is getting the hold harmlesses, getting the releases to move roads, et cetera, and not have the town in the legal and financial exposure that it is in Baxter and in many other areas right now. So part of the whole negotiation has to be, how do we ensure the town is sort of in the best situation? So it's doing the right thing for the neighborhood, doing the right thing for the neighbors, and doing the right thing going forward. So I didn't leave as feeling as hopeless, I don't think, as others. I left feeling like there is a path here that's going to be difficult, but once we figure it out, it's going to be replicable in a lot of other areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Gary?
Well, I think that there are two different pieces here. One is the geotubes and one is the new road. And I think the geotubes is not doable because of the enormous cost that no one is willing to undertake to keep the geotubes. And so, as Peter was suggesting, there is money available now because there's a bond that the association put up when they put in the geotubes to cover the removal of the geotubes. With respect to the extension or the change to the new Baxter Road location, I look at what happened with the airport when the airport has been trying to get the neighborhood groups to agree on where they are going to put up some employing housing. And like everything else on Nantucket, no one agrees. There are 2 or 3 different groups. They don't want them here, they don't want them here. And finally, the airport did the right thing. They said, okay, we're doing it. Here, we're going to make the choice. It's a reasoned decision, and we're going to go forward. The town can do the same thing with respect to Baxter Road. Arcadis has come up with 3 solutions, and we presented them to the neighbors, and guess what? They don't agree. One group wants here, one group wants here. I think the town ought to pick one with the help of Arcadis, saying this is the best route to go, and just proceed with it. Someone's always going to be unhappy about it. To think we're going to get everyone to agree is doesn't happen in this world anymore. And if there's some litigation, there'll be litigation. But I think the airport did the right thing by picking one of those 3 locations. And I think the town ought to do the right thing by picking one of the 3 recommended Arcadis locations and proceed with the redo of Baxter Road.
Thank you, Gary. Anyone else before we go back to Matt? Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think the town probably will do some version of that, Gary. I mean, I think that's true. I think but if once we do it, there's still all the, sort of all the hoops we have to jump through, and it will take years.
Yep.
The one thing that some people are not paying attention to is Arcadis has also said that that removal of these could be catastrophic, in the short term, and so if it is catastrophic in the short term, then we are in a real pickle with where do we put the road and when do we put it and how do we do it? So I think that's the difficulty. The other thing that's clear to me is I think that Concom is looking at this and I think they understand the difficulty. I think that, they're sort of saying, can you bring something else if you did it differently, et cetera. I think, they've read these Arcadis plans and they know that this is not as simple as it is sometimes portrayed. So I think that was the other takeaway I got is there was more agreement in those meetings of this is difficult and we have some difficult choices and what is the right path. We didn't get all the way to the path, but we're getting closer. And I think that was a real positive of these discussions.
Thank you, Matt. All right, anyone else with further comments at this time? All right, seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Are there any members of the public present who wish to offer a comment at this time? Go ahead and use the raise hand feature. Deanne Atherton.
Thank you, Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Again, these meetings are just becoming more and more interesting and informative and relevant. So thank you for them. Of course, I could make lots of comments, but just one comment I'd like to make, actually two, on the Sconset situation is for you to consider with your site visit to continue beyond the lighthouse up to perhaps the public access at the beach club, that there has been significant increased erosion in this area that it might be helpful for you to view in person. And also that is the public access point for all the construction vehicles that are working on the various erosion control projects south of that point. So that's just a suggestion. Just the second point in regard to Sconset and sort of big issues is it seems to us that there is an island-wide policy issue here that is very rarely, if ever, discussed. And that's the use.
Sorry, before you go ahead, you said it seems to us. Can you clarify who us is?
It's the Nantucket Coastal Conservancy and to many of the members of the public that I think this issue in Sconset has become a point of controversy because public property, the beach below the bluff, is being used for erosion control purposes to protect private real estate. And that is the policy issue that I think is applicable to the whole island, and I hope everyone will think about. I believe if that property below the bluff was owned by the property owners all the way to the high water line, there would not be the issues that we've gone through for the past 10 years. Thank you.
Any other public comment at this time? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, the approval of minutes. We do have the February 14th minutes that were distributed. We do not have the March 14th minutes yet, and the March 28th were just made available shortly before the meeting, so we will not be considering those today. So for the minutes of February 14th, Leah, can you put that up on the screen? Thank you. Did anybody have any comment or correction on the minutes from February 14th? If there are none, we'll take a
Move
motion.
approval. It's Matt.
A second?
Second.
Thank you, Gary. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Carl Borcher,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt, excuse me,
Aye.
excuse me, Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, new business committee and natural resources department reports. We do have a note on the agenda that the 2023 Islands Coastal Conference presented by the Coastal Zone Management and Woods Hole Sea Grant, that is going to be on Nantucket in person, and it is June 12th. And there's a link there for more information. And Leah, I think you are a participant in that.
Yes, thank you, Mary. I'm helping to put that on. So the save the date is out and I will email it to everyone. And we're just kind of doing some last minute agenda tweaks and that should be out in the next week or so. But it's going to start at 9:30 and end at 4:30 and it's at the Athenaeum. And there's some really exciting talks that are going to happen around, coastal resilience stuff, sea level rise, from around the Cape and the islands, hopefully up in Boston, and then from Nantucket. So kind of a nice collaboration of talks. So, and it's free. And there'll be lunch and coffee and drinks and stuff like that. So I hope all of you can attend.
Thank you, Leah.
It's in person. We are working on seeing if we can hire NCTV to have it live streamed to YouTube.
Great. Anything else from the Natural Resources Department? Yes, Leah.
Thank you, Mary. I just wanted to say that a couple of weeks ago, Natural Resources employees and also staff from the Linda Loring Nature Foundation went out to First Bridge and we planted some grass there. And so the Linda Loring Nature Foundation has a plan to do some restoration in that area, probably in a year or two. But we just planted some grass seed and have some hay, straw wattles up to help kind of keep that sediment in the area, because if you go out there, you can see that a lot of the storm water from the road just goes right into the pond and has brought a lot of sediment there, particularly near where the culvert is. So we're hoping that the grass will help stabilize that area before restoration can start. And then I just have one more update. Tomorrow I am attending the conference up in Boston, which the Stone Living Lab is putting on, and Jen is actually presenting there. And it's about nature-based solutions in urban settings. So I'm really excited to attend that and bring that information back to Nantucket and to CRAC.
Great, thank you, Leah. Vince?
We're moving through grant season and we're looking at putting together 2 grants, one for MVP and one for CZM. Last year, this committee did a letter of support for the CZM grant. It would be helpful if the committee could update that. That could be just as simple as Mary proofreading it and us being allowed to change the date to whatever date Mary sees fit. The second one is I would like a letter of support for the climate action plan that I'm putting together, and if the committee doesn't have an objection, if Mary could be empowered to be the one that puts those together.
So the Climate Action Plan is a grant?
MVP grant.
MVP grant, great. Right, we didn't notice that letter of support. What are the deadlines for those, Vince?
The one for MVP is Thursday week, the 4th of May.
Okay. So I guess if anybody wants to make a motion that we provide a letter of support to be written and signed by me.
Also move.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jen, for second. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Carl Borchert,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. So thank you for that. And I think we will provide the letter in the packet for the next meeting so that you have a record of that. And what is the deadline for CZM, Vince?
Oh, off the top of my head, I don't remember. Do you happen to remember, Leah? It's a couple of weeks later. We have a bit more time on that one.
Right, if we're doing a site visit on the 9th, our next meeting wouldn't be until May 23rd. As far as our regular schedule. Do you want to go ahead and do the same authorization if we want to have a motion for me to write and sign a letter of support for the CZM grant that we're pursuing?
Just to say that this again would be the downtown neighborhood flood barrier feasibility assessment, same as last year. We got good feedback, so it makes sense to reapply.
I'll be glad to make that motion.
Thank you, Gary.
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Carl Borchert,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Okay, So other committee reports, not from the Natural Resources Department. Gary?
Mary, I would like to send the members of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers a copy of that excellent report that we were sending to the Select Board. I know it hasn't. So my question is, A, has it gone to the Select Board? I know they haven't reviewed it yet, but is it okay for me to get a copy? You guys could send me a copy so I could send it to the members of the Advisory Committee, because to me, it's a very informative way of letting them know all the stuff that we've been up to in the last several months.
Vince, I don't see an issue with that because we've formally accepted the report.
I have no issue with this unless Leah does. She is the committee liaison.
And
No,
Leah,
I don't have an issue with it. I sent it to town administration to put on the agenda, but I haven't heard back when it's actually going to be, at which meeting it'll be on the agenda. But I don't have a problem with sending it to Gary.
so I would say that, yes, Leah, if you want to provide Gary with a copy of that.
That would be great.
Thank you, Gary. Other committee reports? Let's see. So, a discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. So we've decided on May 9th for the site visit. Our next regular scheduled meeting would be May 23rd. Does anybody have any changes that they want to make? There are 5 Tuesdays in May. Town meeting, of course, is May 6th. So we'll stick with that schedule for May. And as always, if there are topics to bring to the agenda, please let Leah and me know so that we can introduce those. And if there's nothing else, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Peter.
Second.
Thank you, Matt. Gary Beller,
Aye.
Carl Borchert,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you out on, we'll see you at the Natural Resources Department in 2 weeks for a trip out to the Bluff.
Thank you.